In the last lecture module, I introduced this convention for how to use monism, dualism, and pluralism. We said we'd use these as descriptors for classes of categories like substance or property, and they would then be used to describe how many individual categories are posited within some class, how many different kinds of substances, how many different kinds of properties. So we can have monistic substance physicalism, or we could have substance dualism or substance pluralism. We can have monism, dualism, or pluralism for properties as well. We do this instead of just using monism, dualism, and pluralism as ways of thinking about the supposition of fundamental entities or substances. With regard to fundamental entities, we'll see that all three ontological frameworks emerge early on in Greek thought regarding fundamental entities. We'll have a monistic substance physicalism, we'll have a substance dualism, and we'll have a substance pluralism. So within this general usage then, we still have this category of substance monism, and it still has these two major camps: monistic substance physicalism and monistic substance idealism. What we'll notice now is that what differentiates monistic substance physicalism from its idealistic counterpart is the allowance of the kind of properties that the individual ontological framework allows. Monistic substance physicalism holds that there's only one kind of property, only one general class. There's not mental and physical properties. There are only physical properties. Idealism, same story. It differentiates its underlying fundamental entity from the substance physicalist by saying, look, there's only one kind of property. Those properties are all mental properties. And so each substance gets differentiated in terms of the properties that it is hierarchically and dynamically related to. So monistic substance physicalism is going to hold that all objects, properties, and processes, including those associated with the mind and life, belong to a single kind of substance, physical substance. As a result, all theories within the monistic substance physicalistic framework are going to categorize their target phenomenon using physicalistic categories and construct theories for those phenomenon from those physicalistic categories, leveraging hierarchical and dynamical relationships with the goal of explaining all of the phenomenon within. For example, Thales proposes that water is the basic element and seeks to explain how all other objects, properties, processes, etc. result from water and its dynamical relationships with its properties, as well as the hierarchical relationship between the properties and the underlying substance. We'll also have the category of substance dualism. Substance dualists, as well as pluralists, are going to assert the existence of two or more distinct kinds of fundamental entity or substance. Each kind of entity or substance has an ineliminable role in explaining some class or classes of objects, properties, processes, etc. Each substance or fundamental entity being differentiated by its hierarchical and dynamic relations to other elements of the ontological framework. A nice illustration of this is oppositional substance dualism. I use the term oppositional substance dualism to refer to those dualisms that assign opposite or fundamentally different properties to each kind of substance. For example, Plato articulates an oppositional dualism of forms and sensible objects. Plato supposes that forms do not change and admit of no parts. Sensible objects, in contrast, change and can have parts. Thus, and ironically really, the first oppositional substance dualism was not its most famous or infamous iteration, mind-body substance dualism. But it does illustrate how these oppositional property and substance dualisms work. They differentiate the substances by differentiating kinds of properties and establishing hierarchical relationships such that only one kind of property can be had by one kind of substance. The mind-body substance dualism illustrates this point nicely. Mind-body substance dualism supposes that in order to explain all the phenomena in the world, one has to suppose the existence existence of two different kinds of substance, each with their own specialized class of properties. Mind-body substance dualism supposes that to understand and explain minds, their properties, and their processes requires the supposition of a mental substance that is differentiated in terms of its hierarchical and dynamic relationships to a class of properties, mental properties. Likewise, to understand and explain physical objects, properties, and processes, the mind-body substance dualist requires the supposition of a physical substance that is defined in terms of its only having these hierarchical and dynamical relationships between its class of physical properties. Finally, let's turn our attention to pluralism. Substance pluralism asserts that there are more than two fundamental kinds of substance and that each substance has its own characteristic properties. For instance, Anaxagoras appears as the ultimate pluralist in our readings. Anaxagoras holds that all types of materials, from milk to gold, constitute distinct, externally existing substances with their own respective characteristic properties. Empedocles is also a substance pluralist. Empedocles posits the existence of the basic four elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and he supposes that they are interblended to create all other substances in virtue of two forces: love for combining and strife for separating these elements